Ma'am.
Stop it. Look at me.
Ma'am!
He keeps turning. He keeps turning.
Ma'am, I can't have you talking up in court, okay? I need you to hear this. The next time it happens, there will be a consequence. Do you understand that?
Yes,
All right? Mr. Rhodes, you're smiling. I don't know why you're smiling.
Because I can.
Well?
Because I can. It's not a crime to smile.
What happens when a rumor fuels fear, and that fear triggers a cascade of murder? Today, we are going to Louisville, Kentucky, to uncover the chilling case that left the city shaken. A case where two teenage brothers, just 14 and 16, were lured into what they thought was a party, but walked straight into their executioner's trap. And the killer, a local rapper, smirked annoyingly in court and made a mockery of everyone, including the grieving family and the judge, because he thought the evidence was gone and his darkest secret was buried for good. But he didn't know that his darkest secret was about to be exposed by the people very close to him, people who were in that very room and saw what happened that very day. He thought he had silenced them forever, but the truth has a voice, and this time it came from inside his circle. This is a horrifying true story of how 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon were lured, betrayed, and executed, all to cover up a murder they were never supposed to witness. Welcome to Wrenching Crimes. If you are new here, we share real-life crime stories that deserve to be heard. Stories that give voice to victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. On May 22nd, 2016, a young woman was riding her bike through West Louisville when she rode past an old abandoned building on the 4000 block of River Park Drive in the Shawn neighborhood of West Louisville. But something strange caught her eye. Something that wasn't there the previous day when she rode past that building. The building had been burned. She knew something wasn't right because when she passed through the previous day, the building, although old, was still intact and unburnt. She became curious and decided to go closer and check what had happened. As she stepped closer, her heart began to race. Her jaw dropped at the sight of what she saw. Lying there in the wooded area behind the abandoned home was something she couldn't process at first, a burnt body. The flames had done so much damage to the body that it was impossible to tell who it was. And then, just a few steps away, she saw another body, burned just as badly. Two lives destroyed beyond recognition. Her breath caught in her throat. Shaking and overwhelmed by what she saw, she immediately called 911. When the officers arrived at the scene, the air was thick with shock and silence. What the officers found was horrifying. Two bodies were burnt beyond recognition. At first, no one, including the neighbors, knew who the two burned bodies were. The fire had stripped away everything. Faces, clothes, even a chance to recognize them as someone's son's brothers or friends. The officers quickly secured the crime scene while trying to preserve whatever evidence the fire hadn't destroyed. But the horror didn't stop there. The detectives knew this wasn't just a crime scene. It was the beginning of a much darker story. Investigators described the site as remote, tangled under brush and deserted, fostering an environment where such a horrific crime could go unnoticed. One of the officers described it as the most horrific murder he had ever seen. One of the residents, Donna Beasley, who saw the scene from her backyard, was very terrified, and she recounts the horrific nature of the crime.
And I could see them laying there side by side, and you could tell they had been burned. You could see their feet. They didn't have on any socks and shoes. Their heads were turned to the side.
Donna says people in her neighborhood were coming by on Sunday terrified that their loved ones could be one of the victims.
The bodies were taken for autopsy, and the investigators were met with a harsh reality. These weren't accidental deaths. Someone had done this on purpose and burnt the bodies to cover up. The autopsy results showed that the boys had multiple blunt force injuries on their heads and were brutally stabbed to death before their corpses were set on fire to cover any evidence. Since the bodies were burned beyond recognition, the detectives had little to go on. It was difficult to identify who they were by merely looking at them. So, the detectives took a difficult step. They had forensic sketches drawn up of what the boys might look like, based on what was left. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. They also searched missing persons reports, hoping for a match, but nothing came up, nothing that could bring names to the faceless victims. So they waited, hoping someone, some heartbroken mother or concerned family member or friends, would walk through their doors to report missing persons. Finally, detectives got their first real breakthrough. After sketches of the two boys were released by investigators, a staff member at Olmsted Academy North, a local school where the teenagers were schooled at the time of the incident, recognized their students Maurice and Larry and immediately alerted the police. That tip allowed detectives to identify 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon, two half-brothers who had horrifically met their untimely end. With names finally attached to the bodies, investigators obtained their contact information, including the phone numbers of the boys. When they dialed one of the boys' phone numbers, expecting their mother or any family member to pick up, but someone else did, raising immediate suspicion. This phone, believed to be with a missing teen or his parents, was now in the hands of a stranger possibly tied to murder. It was the break police needed. Investigators scrambled to contact their mother, Elizabeth Wren. When investigators showed her the sketches, Elizabeth's heart sank. She recognized them instantly. They were her sons, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon. But due to the horrifying condition of the bodies, she was never allowed to see them. The flames had done too much damage. As a mother, being denied the chance to say goodbye, to hold your child one last time, that's a pain no one should ever experience. Through tears, she told the police what she knew. Larry and Maurice had gone to a party on the night of Saturday, May 21st, and had not returned. The party was organized and held at the home of a 25-year-old man named Bryce Rhodes, who is a local Kentucky rapper. Her son's friend, named Ja'Cory Taylor, had come to her house to pick her sons up. Elizabeth knew Taylor very well, and he had previously lived with her and her sons in the same home. Taylor was also her son's schoolmate, so Taylor was a familiar face to her family. Larry and Maurice promised their mother that they would come back the same day after the party. When Maurice and Larry didn't come back home that night, Elizabeth didn't panic right away, because that was not the first time that her sons had spent the night outside their home. Her sons had a habit of staying out a little too long to party, hanging with friends or sleeping over at someone's house, most especially Bryce. So she felt that this was one of the times when her sons would sleep over at someone's house. Little did she know that this time was different. She even called one of her son's phones on Sunday morning, May 22nd, 2016, but the phone was picked up by another boy who told her that he was on his way to buy groceries and he would give her son the phone to call her later. But she didn't hear from the boy again, nor did any of her sons call her throughout that day. After listening to Elizabeth, the police knew that something had gone wrong, something that turned a party into a murder scene. And from that moment on, detectives had one mission: to find out why two boys ended up dead, and whether the killer had been hiding in plain sight. When the detectives traced the activities and the GPS location of Maurice's phone, it was found in the hands of 15-year-old Anjuan Carter, who was a member of the gang, and was also present at the party that was held in Bryce Rhodes' house. One of the investigators said that when Carter saw him, he was afraid and immediately hid the cell phone under the mattress. Slowly, the suspect involved in the murder were all traced and arrested. The suspects are 25-year-old Bryce Rhodes, who is a local rapper and a man who is already on police radar for committing several atrocities. 15-year-old high school student Anjuan Carter, 17-year-old Ja'Cory Taylor, and 19-year-old Tyron Coleman. Suddenly, this wasn't just a missing persons case. This was something much darker. Now, let me tell you a little about Bryce Rhodes, the man whose house the brothers had gone to the party of no return. His nickname was Rambo. He is a flashy local rapper.
Trapping and I'm jugging, bitch, I'm trapping and I'm jugging. Trapping and I'm jugging, bitch, I'm trapping and I'm jugging. Trapping and I'm jugging, bitch, I'm trapping and I'm jugging. Trapping and I'm jugging, bitch, I'm trapping and I'm jugging. Trap, bitch, I'm trapping.
Behind the image of a rapper, Bryce is a dangerous man with a violent past. He was a ticking time bomb, a man raised in chaos, shaped by violence and fueled by rage. He grew up in a troubled home in Louisville, Kentucky, surrounded by abuse, neglect, and mental illness. Raised by his mother, Bryce's life was full of chaos and abuse. At a young age, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and ADHD, but he never got the help that he needed. Growing up, his biggest wish was to belong to a gang to get power, control, and terrorize. He tried to join several gangs, but was rejected. At the age of 15, he was involved in robbery. He was arrested and imprisoned for 6 years. When he got out of prison, people thought that he would become a better person, but instead, he became more violent than before. He attacked his mother and girlfriend, and even committed sexual assault. Despite multiple arrests and violating probation, he kept slipping through the system. Still desperate for power and fame and control, Bryce turned to music, creating a fake rapper persona. Since other hired gangs rejected him, he created his gang and started targeting vulnerable teenage boys. He lured them in with promises of money, fake, featuring them in his rap videos and a flashy lifestyle. He would flash some fake jewelry, organize a party for the teens, buy them fast food, and show awesome cash. That was how Bryce pulled Maurice and Larry into his circle. In turn, Maurice and Larry brought in their schoolmate and friend, Anjuan. Later, Taylor, who is Anjuan's cousin, also became part of Bryce's growing gang. He used these teenagers for crimes, drug deals, doing chores, and cleaning up his messes. Bryce wasn't building a brotherhood. He was building an army of kids who didn't know better. Teenagers who just wanted to belong. And he made sure they saw him as their only ticket out of the struggle. If anyone stepped out of line or questioned him, Bryce turned cold quickly and threatened the person. He was in complete control. And the scariest part? He liked it. He knew these kids would never betray him because they were already too deep. He made sure they crossed lines they couldn't come back from. That was his power. That was his trap. Once you were in, you were too deep to escape. And everything, every lie, every manipulation came crashing down after the brutal murder of those two teenage brothers. It was a crime that shocked the entire city of Louisville. Now, after Bryce was arrested, detectives brought him in for questioning. But he wasn't shaken. He denied everything. He claimed that he hadn't seen the brothers in almost a week. His expression was cold, almost indifferent, like he couldn't care less that two teenage boys were dead. When the police executed search warrants at Bryce's house on North Hyde Avenue, they found 2 knives and a hammer in his bedroom, blood-stained carpets in his living room, and a blood-stained blanket from a nearby dumpster. They discovered the back seat of Bryce's car had been removed, and a strong smell of bleach inside. This alteration suggested an attempt to bury every piece of evidence. The forensic test on the blood-stained carpet matched Larry's DNA, while the blanket found in the dumpster matched Maurice Gordon's DNA. Then came Anjuan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor. At first, both of them claimed they had nothing to do with the murders. Taylor, especially, was firm. He sat stiffly in his chair, insisting again and again that he knew nothing. It was like he had built a wall around himself, determined to bury the truth deep inside. But Carter was different. He couldn't hide the fear. His hands trembled. He nervously bit his nails, humming softly under his breath. The weight of what he'd witnessed was eating him alive. And then he cracked. Carter broke down and revealed the horrifying truth about what happened to Maurice and Larry. What he saw was so disturbing that after confessing, he crawled under the interrogation table, sobbing, as if being chased by the ghost of that night. Later, Taylor also admitted his role in the crime. Both Taylor and Carter agreed to a plea deal in exchange for lighter sentences, and agreed to testify against Bryce in court. But during Bryce's trial in 2023, Taylor froze. He sat on the stand, silent. Maybe fear caught up with him, or guilt. The judge had to threaten him with jail time before he finally spoke. And when he did, the truth came spilling out. Every chilling detail of how Maurice and Larry were lured, attacked, and executed. The confessions from both Carter and Taylor confirmed what the detectives had feared all along. This was no random act of violence. It was a calculated, cold-blooded murder orchestrated by Bryce Rhodes. Their confessions pulled back the curtain and exposed the horrific truth. Before the brothers, Maurice and Larry, were killed, there was another crime, one that set everything in motion. Back in May 2016, Bryce thought he had stumbled on a golden opportunity when he heard that a local gang was offering a $10,000 reward to kill a man. Rhodes hoped to gain respect, cash, and possibly membership by doing it himself. He told his teenage gang members about it, and even bragged about how they would share the money amongst themselves if they could look for a way to get a gun and take out the target. Taylor later got a gun from his friend, which he said that is for protecting himself. Bryce borrowed the gun from Taylor and told the gang that they would use it to shoot the man who had a bounty on his head. On the evening of May 4th, 2016, Bryce and the teens were driving through the Chickasaw neighborhood in his car. Maurice Gordon was driving. Taylor was in the front passenger seat, and Bryce sat in the back behind Maurice. Behind them, Carter followed closely in his truck. As they drove past South 41st Street, they spotted a man walking alone. Bryce assumed he was a target. Bryce told Maurice to stop the car, and then he pulled his gun and shot the man in the chest, and the gang drove off quickly, leaving the man, who was later identified as Christopher Jones, in his pool of blood. Christopher was later rushed to the hospital by other people, but he later succumbed to his injuries and died. Unfortunately, Christopher turned out to be the wrong target, and there was no bounty on his head. He was just a good father, husband, and a law-abiding citizen minding his business and taking care of his young family. Burst never confirmed if it was the right man or not. He just shot the first man they saw on the street and cut short the life of an innocent man who was going about his business. All Bryce wanted was recognition, cash, and the possibility of being accepted into the higher gang. Well, Bryce never got paid because he hit the wrong person. Christopher died out of mistaken identity and Rhodes' desperation to climb the criminal social ranks. Although Bryce had just killed an innocent man, but it didn't move him. After the shooting, the gang returned to Maurice and Larry's house like nothing had happened. The teenage boys had now realized that they won't receive any payments because Bryce had killed the wrong target. They all just swept everything under the carpet and moved on. No one dares to complain. Bryce even ordered Carter to burn the truck, just in case security cameras had captured it on the scene. He made it clear to everyone that no one was to speak a word of what had happened to other people. Maurice and Larry, the brothers who had once looked up to Bryce, were now terrified. They had witnessed what he was capable of, and it shook them. They started avoiding him. They later told their mother what happened. They couldn't keep it to themselves. When Bryce found out that the brothers had told their mother, he became furious. So he decided to kill them so that they would not expose his secret to the police or other people. So he came up with a plan. He told Taylor, who was a close friend of Maurice and Larry, that they were going to terminate the brothers' lives because they snitched. They will set a trap for them, lure them, and take them out. Taylor knew about Bryce's deadly plan. Yet, he did warn the brothers. He didn't tell them they were being targeted. Instead, he agreed to help Bryce lure them in. On the evening of Sunday, May 21st, 2016, Bryce organized a small party in his house. He asked Taylor to go and bring Maurice and Larry to the party. Bryce's mom and sister were away at the time, so it sounded like the perfect teenage hangout. Maurice and Larry didn't suspect anything because they had partied at Bryce's house before. Despite being scared of him after what he did to Christopher, they still didn't believe he would ever hurt them. They had no idea they were walking into a trap, because what was waiting for them at that party was their final night alive. At the party, the gang was drinking, smoking, and having fun. Then, suddenly, Ja'Cory Taylor accused Maurice and Larry of stealing Bryce's money. This made an argument break out between Maurice and Taylor. Maurice felt threatened and unsafe. There was yelling, arguing, and everything felt tense. So, he quickly grabbed a knife to protect himself and his brother. Instead of Bryce to calm the chaos as an adult amid kids, he decided to escalate everything. He took the knife away from Maurice and hit him with his fist. He told him that he was going to violate him. This is just like street slang for inflicting pain on someone. Maurice didn't think much about this at first. He thought that Bryce was just going to punch him. He never knew that Bryce had something more terrible in mind for him and his brother.
Made Maurice on his knees and begged for forgiveness. He tied him up. Tied him up or something. He tied his brother up. He made his brother sit in the bathroom.
Carter said that Bryce made Maurice kneel and beg for forgiveness. Then the gang tied the brothers up and separated them so they could not help themselves fight back or even have any escape plan. Bryce kept Larry in the bathroom and left Maurice in the living room. Then he asked the rest of the gang to cast a vote on whether the boys should live or die. Carter was the only one who voted that they should live, while others voted that the boys die. Anyways, even if Carter wasn't outvoted, the result wouldn't even matter because Rhodes holds a power and intent. He didn't care what the others thought. He had already decided to kill the boys before so that they wouldn't expose his deepest secret, which was the murder of Christopher Jones. Maurice knelt helplessly begging Bryce for mercy. He told Bryce not to harm him because he sees him as an elder brother. But what follows next was more horrific.
He put a toboggan over his head and he put a rag in his mouth. And then he stabbed him.
Bryce was merciless, and his heart hardened. Carter said that Bryce put a hat over Maurice's head and stuffed socks in his mouth to stop him from shouting. Then he stabbed him repeatedly in his chest. Carter and Taylor watched in horror as Bryce stabbed Maurice to death. They couldn't help Maurice or leave the house because they might be victims of the same horrific fate. After stabbing Maurice to death, he passed the knife to others to stab Maurice. Bryce made sure that Taylor and Carter stabbed Maurice, too. He wants all of them to make a mark, be involved, and that way they will stay silent. He didn't want to go down alone. He gave the orders, and no one dared to question him. Out of fear, they did. Their hands were trembling from the horror before them.
We moved Maurice to the side, and we brought his brother, and we put the toboggan over his head. He put the toboggan over his head and put the sock in his mouth. And started stabbing him too.
Carter recalled how they moved Maurice's body aside after killing him and brought Larry out of the bathroom. He recalled the heartbreaking moments when Larry pleaded for his life. He wanted to live. He pleaded that Bryce spare him, but all his cries fell on deaf ears. No one could help. Bryce subjected Larry to the same horrific death that he had inflicted on his brother. He covered his face, bounded, gagged, and stabbed him mercilessly till he died. Then he made others stab Larry's body. Bryce called his gang member and friend to help move the bodies. They loaded the brothers' bodies into Bryce's car and drove them to a lot behind an abandoned house and set their bodies on fire. Before they left, Bryce instructed Anjuan and Carter to stay back and clean the house. According to Carter, they stayed up all night cleaning the house. This confession helped provide the answer to the questions the police and everyone were asking. Who killed and burned the boys, and why were they killed? Carter and Taylor's confessions during the interrogation, and in court confirmed that Bryce orchestrated the murders. He manipulated and intimidated everyone around him to cover up Christopher's murder. Before their confession, Bryce had thought that his co-defendants had his back. It looked like he might slip and walk free. There were no surveillance cameras, barely any solid evidence, and not a single eyewitness willing to speak out loud. While in custody, he even sent a letter to Taylor threatening him not to confess. And that gave him a dangerous kind of confidence that his secret is safe and his crime is buried forever. He thought that he had already thrown the other boys under the bus. And in his mind, that was enough to keep himself in the clear. He believed the secret would stay buried. So, during the trial in December 2023, Bryce walked into court like a man untouchable. He didn't show guilt. Not once. Instead, he sat there with a smug look on his face, smirking while the families of the victims cried just a few feet away. He wasn't silent either. He stirred chaos. Bryce's behavior in court wasn't just disturbing, it was violent. During one of the hearings, he spat directly on his attorney. The shocking act forced the lawyer to immediately withdraw from the case. Court officials had to place Bryce in restraints and later put him in a spit mask to prevent further outbursts. He threatened the judge. He even tried to escape from the prison by digging a hole with a metal object. When officers caught him, he quickly flushed the object into the toilet. At one point, he blew kisses at the mother of the slain, who was grieving, as if he were enjoying the pain he caused. His outburst got so bad that officers had to step in more than once just to keep order in the courtroom. Whenever things didn't go his way, he snapped, shouting over the judge, slamming the table, doing anything to rattle the room. But his confidence shattered when his co-defendants took plea deals and agreed to testify. The truth spilled out, and Bryce's lies collapsed. Bryce was convicted of 3 counts of murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. However, the judge ruled that Bryce could not be given the death penalty because of his mental illness and low intellectual development. In March 2024, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Each of Rhodes' teenage co-defendants received significant prison time under plea agreements. Anjuan Carter was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was granted early release on probation in 2019, but with strict conditions that he had to offer a public apology and pay for the headstones of the murder brothers. If he violates his probation, he faces up to 20 years in prison. Ja'Cory Taylor was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, with the judge rejecting his request for probation. Tyron Coleman was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Although his attorney pleaded for probation, it was denied. The horrific way Bryce terminated Maurice and Larry astonished everyone. He showed no mercy to the teenagers. Their pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. One of the most painful parts of this story is that even when one of the boys was begging Bryce not to kill him, he said he was like Bryce's younger brother. Yet, Bryce still went ahead and terminated his life. Bryce mocked the family's pain and grinned from ear to ear as though he had just won a golden award for taking the life of another. The murder of Larry and Maurice Gordon devastated their mother, grandmother, friends, and family. They were completely shattered, not just by the loss, but by the cold and calculated way the boys were killed by someone they knew and trusted. Elizabeth was robbed of a future with her sons.
It's been 7 long years. And I've been waiting for this day that Maurice Gordon and Larry Ordway and Christopher Jones got justice today.
It's been 7 years and 7 months. We can't tell you how this has been. Nothing is the same. Nothing.
The family's grief is something that can't be measured. What hurt them most wasn't just a loss. It was a betrayal. The brutality, and the cold way the boys were disposed of. Their deaths weren't just a tragedy. They were a soul-deep trauma that ripped a hole through the family, one they would carry forever. Two young boys, full of life and dreams, were taken far too soon. Betrayed by someone they trusted, manipulated by a man chasing status through fear. Bryce Rhodes didn't just end lives. He shattered a family, a community, and whatever future Larry and Maurice could have had. As for Christopher, his family faced unbearable pain. His child had to grow up without a father because of Bryce's irrational behavior.
He killed Chris for no reason at all. And it's just not enough because I am by myself taking care of my son. By myself, he does not have no daddy. Due to this man in here taking his life away for no reason.
A whole family was thrown into grief. Our heart goes out to them. As we close this tragic chapter, we are reminded of how the need to belong can sometimes lead the vulnerable into the hands of predators wearing charm as a mask. This story is a reminder. Be careful who you trust. Monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes they smile, promise you the world, offer you fame, and then they destroy you, protect their lies and fake images. Many kids like Larry, Maurice, Taylor, and Carter want to get quick fame and make money. As parents, it is our responsibility to guide our children correctly so that they won't fall victim to this. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do we protect our kids from predators who are the face of friendship? Until next time, stay safe.